Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. When none of us are on vacation, or all of us are on a bit of an enforced vacation. And it feels strange, but what's stranger is today's episode, which is talking about 2019. We are at the tail end of April, almost touching May. It seems very odd to talk about 2019, which seems such a long time ago. But here we go. This is what I learned in 2019. Hope it helps you as well. When Renuka and I were getting married, I got into a bit of a dispute with my father-in-law-to-be. We had decided to have a small wedding. A small wedding in India can have as many as 250 guests. And then we were told we had to have a live band, and we had to have this, and we had to have that. And with every single demand, we started to get very frustrated. Renuka and I wanted to have less of an event, and everybody else wanted to have more. And you have this tension. And the tension escalates to fights, and it's not a good situation to be in. One day, my father-in-law-to-be took me aside and said, "This is the first big thing that's happened to us in the last 20 or 25 years. Would you want us to go ahead with this or just let it fall flat?" And of course, I said, no, that's not what I want. Now, I didn't realize it at that point, and I probably don't think he realized it either, but it was a very skillful piece of negotiation. There I was playing the terrorist, making counter demands, and in fewer than 3 sentences, he'd gotten me over to his side. That to me is one of the first lessons of 2019, because the year itself involved so much negotiation. And this brings us to the first learning, which is we spend too much time in confrontation instead of negotiation. Think of any given day. Maybe we argue with our partner, or maybe there is a package that's supposed to arrive and it hasn't shown up, or worse, we're at the airport and the flight has been delayed. Our first and possibly only reaction is confrontation. And yet, with a tiny bit of negotiation, so much can be achieved. What's incredibly exciting as well is that you don't need much to get a person to see your point of view. In 2019, we had to negotiate 2 parts of our fences, one on the right-hand side and one in the backyard. And as I went through the negotiation of both the fences, I realized that the book I'd read earlier in the year was incredibly helpful. So helpful that I listened to the audio version, and I also did a course. It's a book by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. In that he covers quite a fair bit, as you'd expect, but I couldn't remember any of it at all, which is why I'm hanging on to just one point, and that one point is sounds like. That's what a lot of negotiation can just hang on and make it very powerful for you as a negotiator. Let's take a situation. Let's say you're at a cafe, you've been sitting there patiently, but you're not being served your coffee and it's getting to you. The easy way is to complain, to rant a bit. Instead, let's use the term sounds like. So you turn to the waitress and say, "Sounds like it's been a really rough day. What do you think she's going to do next?" Yes, exactly. You're the only one who's even considered the nightmare that she's going through. She's going to tell you how rough her day has been. And then when she's done with her rant, she's going to ask you whether you're waiting on something. Of course you are, but at that moment, you magically got pushed to the front of the line. Or take, for example, when someone is upset with you. Let's say it's a client discussion, and they tell you that there's a problem. There's something bothering them. What do you say? How about we use sounds like? So you say to them, sounds like we didn't do what you expected. And immediately, they switch to this explanation mode. And you can do this at home as well. Maybe your spouse is really upset with you, and she or he is really grumpy at you. And you say, sounds like keeping the glass on the sofa gets you bugged at me. What you're doing at that point in time is you're kind of giving the other person the chance to tell you exactly what's wrong, and you're entering into this phase of negotiation. And because you're slightly vague about it, they don't feel like you're pinning them down. Sounds like doesn't feel like an accusation. It feels like you want to fix things and you need to know what's coming next, what to do next. And in both the negotiations that we had about the fences and other negotiations, we were on the defensive. And yet, when I used sounds like in a negotiation, they came back with solutions that helped us to move ahead. We run into situations quite a lot, whether we're at the cafe or with a client or with a spouse or so many things. And it's very interesting to know that when something unexpected hits you, we can just fight back, confrontation, or we can step back just a little bit and say, sounds like, and then see where it goes. Just put a line after sounds like, see how it goes. And I believe that if we continue to practice confrontation almost all the time, then both parties get angry and it kind of escalates to the point where no one wants to back down and it gets worse than ever before. But if we avoid the confrontation and instead we get into negotiation, then we're getting results. Both of us are getting results. My father-in-law knew that I was an idiot. I was young. I wanted my way. And the way he approached it almost seemed like, sounds like you're worried about something. And just that statement, sounds like, would have opened the floodgates. Yes, I was worried about something. I was worried about who was going to foot the bill. He was, anyway, but I didn't know that. A simple worry had turned into this needless confrontation. And to diffuse it, sounds like, is a very easy and effective way forward. I know that you've possibly got a pile of books to read. But if you want to add to that pile, or actually put this at the top of the pile, then Chris Voss's book is an excellent piece of work. If not, then just use sounds like. When you feel you're getting into a situation that's not so nice, just say sounds like, and you'll see that the results change very much in your favor. And that's the cool thing. And that was my first learning for the year. Negotiation is so much better than confrontation. This takes us to the second part, which is the concept of practice. Whenever people say practice, they always say practice and you'll get better. But what's really happening? Why do we get better with practice? Let's find out, shall we? There's a story about a teacher and two students. Both the students are playing a violin, so they're violinists. And in the story, the teacher goes up to the student and he speaks to them while they're playing the violin. The first student can't cope with both the conversation and the piece, so he stops. So the teacher then moves on to the second student, and he can speak as well as play the violin. In short, that student doesn't have to think about what he's doing because it's now become second nature. In all the years I've been learning new skills, I always saw practice as something you repeated. If you did something over and over again, you'd theoretically improve. And you were told time and time again that it had to be deliberate practice, because just practicing a skill randomly, that isn't much use. But if we look at practice in a different light, as not having to think, then that's totally different. Look at all the things that we do every single day. We walk from one end of the room, we go down the stairs, we never consider the feat of balance and technique. And yet, we're not thinking. We're just walking. But if we look at someone who's very young, who's aged, or someone who's had an unfortunate accident, for that person, every step requires an enormous amount of concentration. 50 or 100 steps later, they're exhausted from the sheer energy needed to do the task. Take, for example, my wife Renuka, who had an accident in the garden about 10 years ago. Her left pointer finger was amputated and then it was reattached. Even so, her brain couldn't work out what to do with the finger. Even the most straightforward task of tracing her finger in the sand, that became extremely tricky. Lifting a wine glass while using the finger, that was out of her reach. It took a scare from the physiotherapist to get her to practice every day so that the brain would recognize and start to use the finger just like before. Practice sounds like repetition, but what if it were looked at as learning it so well that we don't have to think about it? Take, for instance, the example of my new camera. On the way back from Vietnam last year, I bought myself a camera. And then, like most camera enthusiasts, I went and bought a whole bunch of things. I bought a tripod, I bought another lens, and all of this started to drive me crazy. I was like that violinist who couldn't play and speak at the same time. I was tied up in knots every time I needed to figure out what to do with the camera. And we're not even talking about anything sophisticated, because I wasn't even able to focus with the camera. So what would a sane person do? They'd give up. But I practiced, and the goal wasn't to get repetitive, but to stop thinking about it. Hence, I'd force myself to reach for a button and know exactly what that button does. So I worked my way through the buttons until, you guessed right, I didn't have to think about it. Now, you can give me the camera in pitch darkness, and of course, I'll get a very dark picture, but I will know what I'm doing. The shift from practice as a chore to practice as not having to think seems almost like this very pedantic thing, like we're just renaming stuff. It is the same thing. Theoretically, it is the same, but mentally, there is a massive chasm between the two definitions. Not having to think means that every tiny element has to become fluent bit by bit until it flows together like a single impulse. And this concept of a single impulse is very well explained by Benjamin Zander on the TED stage.
Before we start, I need to do two things. One is I want to remind you of what a 7-year-old child sounds like when he plays the piano. Maybe you have this child at home. He sounds something like this. I see some of you recognize this child. Now, if he practices for a year and takes lessons, he's now 8 and he sounds like this. And then he practices for another year and takes lessons, now he's 9. And then he practices for another year and takes lessons, now he's 10. At that point, they usually give up. Now, if you'd waited for one more year, you would have heard this. Now, what happened was not maybe what you thought, which was he suddenly became passionate, engaged, involved, got a new teacher, he hit puberty, or whatever it is. What actually happened was the impulses were reduced. You see, the first time he was playing with an impulse on every note. And the second, with an impulse every other note. You can see it by looking at my head. The 9-year-old put an impulse on every 4 notes. and the 10-year-old on every 8 notes. And the 11-year-old one impulse on the whole phrase. I don't know how I got into this position. I didn't say I'm going to move my shoulder over, move my body. No, the music pushed me over, which is why I call it one buttock playing. Can be the other buttock.
And to me, at least, that doesn't sound like practice. Even though the whole thing was about practice, it sounds more like not having to think. And if we look at it that way, as controlling one aspect so that we don't have to think about it in the next thing, then we get this tiny incremental learning, which we can use as educators and we can use as people learning, so that once we have control over that, don't have to think anymore. That was my second learning. And it took away a lot of the negative aspects that I had about practice, which is it's just boring. Instead, I was looking at it. I need to get control over this thing. Then I don't have to think about it anymore. And the third concept is something that I've spoken about before, but it came back to bite me, and it's called the 5% breakage concept. No one wants to break anything. Why would you break something that's not broken? And yet, you often get better results. In 2016, after a visit to India, we started eating dosas for breakfast. A dosa, for want of a better word, looks like a crepe. It's crispy, it's made with fermented rice flour and dal. All of this is mixed up and you get the batter. And we'd been making the batter at home, and our trusty Indian grinder was trusty no more because it broke down. You can't just go to the store and buy any old grinder or mixer because they don't really do what the Indian dosa mixers do. Now, we'd been having dosas for 3 or 4 years in a row. We'd got used to dosas for breakfast. And for the most part, dosas need to be ground, and we had to look up non-grinding options. We looked on the internet and instantly got a recipe. And this takes us to the moral of the story, doesn't it? The new type of dosa was a lot easier to put together. It had more texture. It ended up more crispy than the original recipe. And we hadn't done much at all. We broke the grinder, or rather the grinder stopped working, and then 5% of the whole thing got changed, and the results were fairly dramatic. Not all results turn out to be so hunky-dory. As I sit in my comfort zone, eating similar meals, sitting in places that I'm happy in, there's a sense of, why fix this? Or rather, why bother to deliberately break it? Even so, I have to keep reminding myself that I have to break things just a little bit. Let's take a few business examples and then some personal ones. We started our podcast around 2014, and for at least 4 years, we kept well to the 20-minute mark, or even the 30-minute mark. But I was always chasing a deadline. It was always start on Monday, finish by Thursday, get it up on the internet by Saturday. And there was this constant need to have that 20-minute or 30-minute podcast every Saturday. But what if we broke the formula by just 5%? What if everything stayed the same, but the podcast was shorter, say about 12 to 15 minutes, or even 6 to 8 minutes? So that's a much bigger breakage. But we had to get ahead of ourselves, so we made that change. And nothing changed in terms of podcast downloads. People were listening to the 20-minute one, the 30-minute one, the 15-minute one, the 8-minute one, and over time, clients liked the mix. Now I could produce 2 podcasts in a week instead of just one big one. I liked it, clients liked it, and it all came because we were forced into the corner, we had to break something, and it worked for the better. I look at things that I do every day and ask myself, how can I break this by at least 5%? Sometimes it breaks and I have to fix it, but often we just have to make that tiny break. Try it. You don't have to replace what you're doing, just break it by about 5%. And that brings us to the end of this podcast about what I learned in 2019. The first one was the coolest of them all. It is negotiation instead of confrontation. We have so much confrontation. All the time, we're confronting people. Or they're confronting us. And we can just say sounds like. And to me, this is like the one thing that most of us can use, whether we're dealing with a bank or an airline or with our spouse or with anybody. It sounds like, and you let the other person explain, and the whole situation changes in a few seconds. The second big change for me was this concept of practice. Why it doesn't have to be boring. It just has to be a point where I don't have to think. I'm just pressing a button. I know what that button does. The moment I have to think, then I have to go through a lot of steps. There's a lot of frustration there. And finally, it's the whole concept of breakage. This is such a difficult thing to do, to look at something that's working perfectly well and then go, maybe I'll just try something else. Maybe I'll just break it 5%. Most of the times I'm so grateful when something breaks all by itself, and then I don't have to think about breaking it, and I just have to work out a better way, a superior way, a tastier way. I'm so happy when that happens, because it's so much work to just go through life on a day-to-day basis rather than go around breaking things and trying to fix them. So if you look at it that way, then at least we should hope that life breaks things for us so we can fix it, and we're much better off as a result. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in psychotactics land. One of the things that people ask me, especially as we go through this virus crisis, is do we keep marketing? And the answer is yes. Statistically speaking, if we go back over time and we look at advertising and marketing, is that companies that continue their marketing sequence, whatever they're doing, not ramping it up, but companies that continue their marketing sequence or their advertising sequence, they end up much better after the crisis has passed. But they also do okay during the entire crisis. So for instance, when you look at the article writing course, year after year, since almost 2006, that article writing course has filled up in 24 hours, sometimes 2 batches. We used to sell 2 batches. And they would both fill up in 24 hours. Well, this time we got 85%, so we still have a few seats left. But the point that I'm making here is that we didn't do so badly. We might have done 50%. I was expecting lower than 50%. And yet we got up to 85%. I don't know, by the time this podcast comes out, maybe it'll be full, maybe it won't. And when it came to the home study, we did about 50% of what we normally do. And when you think about it, that's not so bad. In fact, I was keen to get this out of the door, but Renuka was very adamant that we sell this product, we sell this course, which is quite expensive. In fact, it's the most expensive on our website. And she was quite adamant that we do it in the midst of the virus because we could see it approaching, not before. And I think in retrospect, that was really the right way to go, because we might have got 100% like we normally do, but then people might have reassessed their situation, been in trouble, not know how to come back to us. And so it was much better this way. But the point is, keep marketing. Don't ramp up anything. Just do what you're normally doing and you come out so much better. If you're wondering what else is available from Psychotactics, there's a pre-sale course, and I know this is just late April, but it's pre-sale. So pre-sale's happening. That's on the 7th of June. So if you want to mark that date in your calendar, or better still, go to psychotactics.com/pre-goodies. So you get goodies and it's on pre-sale, and you learn quite a lot while you're waiting for the pre-sale course to come out. On the 22nd of June, there's the Da Vinci, which is the cartooning course. Now, people just wait to become cartoonists. People say, I can't draw. I've never been able to draw a straight line. And we've been doing this, I don't know, since 2010, I think, now. People go in saying, I can't draw, and then 6 months later, their friends and their families say, I didn't know you had a skill. I didn't know you had a talent of drawing. And that's the whole point. The whole point is it's not about the cartooning course at all. I mean, it's wonderful to be able to draw, to be able to use those cartoons in your presentations, on your websites, or just to make yourself happy. But it opens up a world. And this is what one of our clients, David Green, is a good friend, and he said to me, once I knew that I could draw, then it opened up not just the drawing world, but it opened up the world of what else have I not been doing? What else can I learn? What other untruths have I been told subconsciously? That you can't draw, you can't write, you can't do this, you can't do that, and that you have to have inborn talent. And if you look at David's work and you look at so many of the people who have gone through the cartooning course, you'll see all of that is rubbish. We will be selling the seats for the Da Vinci course on the 22nd of June this year. So go to psychotactics.com/DAVINCI and you'll read all about it and you can get on the wait list. And that's it from Psychotactics Land. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.